I couldn't hold it in any longer, so I just let it out. "You're seeing someone else, aren't you?" I finally managed to say. Matthew looked genuinely surprised at first, but then, after a brief moment of thought, while he rubbed his forehead, he couldn't help but smirk. "You got me?" he admitted with a chuckle. "I guess I haven't been very loyal, and I don't feel bad about it," he added without a hint of guilt. Then, Matthew had something else to share, walking over with that confident stride of his and a mischievous smile. "Listen, do me a favor, okay? Take extra care of the sick boy. He's taken a shine to you. Make him happy. It's the least you can do. Meanwhile, I'll be focusing on my new interest. If things go well with Mary and me, and we have a son, he will be the future CEO. That's the plan." Matthew seemed to have everything figured out, banking on having a child with Mary, the CEO's daughter, to secure a comfortable future, leveraging her family's power. It struck me as a sad and shallow strategy. Suddenly, the door burst open, and in came Paul, skillfully maneuvering his wheelchair. To everyone's surprise, he stood up and declared, "Mom, let's fight back. My name is Alexis. I'm 33 years old, and I became a stay-at-home mom after getting married. Now I find myself in a complex situation concerning Paul, who, although not my biological child, feels very much like my own. Paul is Matthew's son from his previous marriage. He's a quiet boy, or Matthew claimed when he first introduced Paul to me the day after we married. I was aware of Matthew's divorce, but had no idea he had a son, especially one that he was actively raising. Paul's quiet nature initially left me unsure of how to react, but Matthew seemed unfazed, assuring me, really, he's an easy kid. Only 2 years old and no trouble at all. When I first met Paul, he looked back at me with curiosity and innocence that tugged at my heartstrings. "This is Paul. Say hi to your new mom," Matthew encouraged. Pushed by his dad, Paul shyly greeted me, and just like that, I was thrown into motherhood. I had always imagined having children eventually, but I never thought I'd skip straight to being a mom to a 2-year-old. Paul turned out to be as low maintenance as Matthew had said. He ate whatever was prepared and hardly ever threw tantrums. He was, in every sense, a well-behaved child. According to Matthew, Paul was raised by his grandparents while Matthew focused on his career, leaving me to handle the childcare now that I was not working. This new arrangement brought a lot of appreciation from Matthew's parents, who were grateful for the help. "It's tough having a child around, especially with how busy we all are," they'd say, nodding in understanding at the challenges of raising a child. Paul, sitting quietly beside me, seemed unfazed by the discussions about his behavior or health. At first, I thought his quiet demeanor was due to the new environment and possibly being cautious around me. However, caring for a 2-year-old was more challenging than I anticipated. Paul's curiosity knew no bounds, from climbing on stools to rummaging through the fridge, to playing with the stove knobs, and even drawing on the walls with permanent markers. I shared these exhausting days with Matthew when he returned from work, hoping for some support, but his nonchalant reaction took me by surprise. I didn't realize childcare could be this demanding. One weekend, I desperately needed to catch up on some housework, so I asked Matthew if he could watch Paul. His response left me speechless. "Why should I? Just because you're not his biological mom doesn't mean you can avoid your responsibilities." I was stunned. It wasn't about shirking my duties. I simply needed some time to manage the household chores that were piling up. The idea of neglecting childcare never crossed my mind. All I wanted was a day to focus on tidying up our home. All I wanted was for Matthew to spend a bit of quality time with Paul. When I suggested this, Matthew let out a deep sigh, clearly frustrated. "You're not working at the moment, right? I'm the one who's bringing in the money, supporting us, and now you're saying this?" he argued. But I thought since it was his day off, maybe he could spare a little time. "Why should I exhaust myself with child duties on my day off?" he questioned, hinting that my role was to take care of such things. The implication that he married me primarily for childcare left a sour taste, though he quickly tried to backtrack with an apology. In the end, Matthew's interaction with Paul was brief, only an hour on Saturday morning before he vanished for the day. Exhausted, I felt Paul tug at my finger, his chubby cheeks lifted in concern. "Mom, are you okay?" "You seem tired," he asked. His innocence and concern brought a smile to my face, and as I embraced him, his laughter filled the room. Despite the challenges of daily life and taking care of Paul, my affection for him grew deeply. However, my worries deepened when I noticed something troubling about Paul's walk. Fearing the worst, I took him to see a doctor, where the diagnosis was more serious than I had feared. Paul was at risk of losing his ability to walk. In shock, I attempted to contact Matthew, who was unreachable all day and night. When Matthew finally returned, he dismissed my concerns and frustration about his lack of communication with disdain. "Paul was in the hospital today," I managed to say through my trembling voice. Matthew's reaction turned from dismissive to shocked, yet when I explained the situation and asked for his presence at the next appointment, he hesitated, focusing instead on the negative implications of Paul's condition, blaming it on genetics rather than showing concern. As Matthew's attitude toward the situation became clear, indifferent and blame-shifting, I felt a mix of worry and determination. His late returns home began to seem more like avoidance than necessity. It was evident I couldn't rely on Matthew for support, so I steeled myself to protect and care for Paul alone. Despite Matthew's increasing detachment, the day Paul was discharged from the hospital marked a small moment of cooperation. Matthew showed up, playing the part of a supportive father, promising to work together as a family moving forward. Yet, his earlier absence and reluctance to face reality made his promises ring hollow. In this challenging time, my resolve to care for Paul only strengthened, grateful at least for the opportunity to be there for him as a stay-at-home mom, committed to facing whatever came our way together. After Paul was discharged from the hospital, life took on a new rhythm with him, now using a wheelchair. Seeing him, unable to run around and play like other kids, was deeply upsetting. Despite this, Matthew's pattern of coming home late didn't change, leaving me to find ways to brighten Paul's days. I decided to share my love of drawing with him, giving him a set of art supplies. To my delight, Paul showed a natural talent and joy for drawing, reminiscent of my own. It was a small victory, seeing his ease light up with happiness and focus as he immersed himself in his artwork. 3 years whisked by, and Paul adapted to life in a wheelchair, finding his joys and challenges. He was now 8 and seemed to enjoy school, which eased some of my worries. However, my attempts to connect with Matthew and address our growing distance felt like talking to a wall, leaving issues unresolved and tensions high. Then, unexpectedly, the truth about Matthew's actions outside our home came crashing down through a message from a friend, revealing his infidelity with photographic evidence. The news didn't shock me as much as it confirmed my suspicions, given Matthew's recent odd behavior and late nights. My friend's concern over the phone was palpable, offering support and a listening ear. Despite the turmoil, I felt a strange clarity about my next steps, considering the newfound evidence as leverage in a potential divorce. Yet, after the call, a wave of despair hit me. The realization of Matthew's betrayal, especially during a time when Paul and I faced our challenges, hurt deeply. The thought of Matthew's carefree moments with someone else while we dealt with Paul's condition brought a different, more profound sadness. Paul, sensing something was wrong, found me in tears. His innocent question about his dad's actions towards me, stemming from his feeling that Matthew didn't care for him, broke my heart further. It was a moment of truth, questioning whether to continue living under the pretense that everything was fine or to confront Matthew and consider divorce. What would be best for Paul? The decision weighed heavily on me, leaving me torn between maintaining a semblance of normalcy for Paul's sake and the desire to free ourselves from a situation filled with deceit and neglect. In that vulnerable moment, Paul's concern for my well-being over his own reflected the bond we shared, a stark contrast to Matthew's absence. The dilemma of choosing between confronting the truth or enduring for Paul's benefit left me overwhelmed and seeking the best path forward for both our sakes. Paul shared something with me one day that broke my heart. "I didn't want to upset you, but I saw Dad with another woman. They seemed happy together," he confessed, his eyes cast downward. At that moment, as I embraced him, I realized the burden he had been carrying alone. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us. Paul's feelings towards his dad were mixed, but his love for me was clear. "I like you, Mom. I love you too," he said softly. That was the turning point for me, the moment I decided to pursue a divorce. I took concrete steps towards ending our marriage, hiring a private investigator to gather undeniable proof of Matthew's infidelity. The evidence compiled smoothly, setting the stage for a showdown once Matthew returned home. Despite his sporadic presence, his belongings remained, hinting at his inevitable return. As I prepared myself for the confrontation, moments of doubt crept in. Was I making the right decision? My love for Matthew had long vanished, but the implications for Paul weighed heavily on my mind. Paul and I shared no blood relation, a fact that often troubled me, especially as I considered the prospect of custody post-divorce. Would Paul benefit from Matthew's presence in his life, however flawed it might be? Yet, the longer Matthew stayed away, the more I pondered the convenience of silence. No confrontation, no divorce, and financial stability maintained. But Paul, sensing my hesitation, offered his unwavering support, strengthening my resolve. When Matthew finally came home, it was time to address the elephant in the room. His reaction to my accusations was surprisingly nonchalant, readily admitting to his affairs and even welcoming the divorce. His eagerness to move on, especially with plans to start a new family with the CEO's daughter, was both shocking and hurtful. But amid our discussion, Paul entered the room, a silent testament to the family Matthew was willing to leave behind. The conversation with Matthew revealed his true priorities, focusing on a future that excluded Paul and me. His dismissive attitude towards his son's well-being, suggesting that I solely bear the responsibility, confirmed the necessity of our separation. Matthew's plans for a new life, banking on a relationship with the CEO's daughter for security, epitomized his selfishness and short-sightedness. At that moment, Paul's presence reminded us of what truly mattered. Despite Matthew's detachment, Paul and I had each other. The decision to divorce, though fraught with complexity, was ultimately about securing a happier, more honest future for Paul and me. As we faced the reality of our fractured family, it was clear that our strength lay in our bond, ready to navigate the challenges ahead together. Paul stayed in his seat, a thoughtful expression crossing his face before he suddenly suggested, "Wouldn't ongoing support be better than a one-time payment?" This took me aback, and I could see Matthew trying to appeal to my better nature. "You're compassionate, Alexis. You were considering taking Paul in even after our divorce, right? But let's face it, without a job or savings, life can be tough," he said, trying to convince me to reconsider. "So, what are you suggesting?" I asked, skepticism clear in my tone. Matthew, with an earnestness that seemed out of place, suggested we forget everything and start afresh, as if it was the only logical solution. "We can keep living as we were. It's a win-win situation. Let's just call it even this time," he proposed. I couldn't hide my disbelief. "Are you joking?" I asked, pointing out his absurdity. "Firstly, why am I being blamed here? You're the one who was unfaithful and mismanaged our finances, not me," I countered, dismissing his attempt to downplay his actions. Matthew tried to belittle my concerns by labeling me as just a housewife with limited qualifications, suggesting I wouldn't be able to find a job easily and that it would be better to stay with him. I quickly corrected him, "Don't worry about me, I've already secured a job." His surprise was evident. I explained, with Paul by my side, that we had found a unique way to contribute financially. "Thanks to Paul," I began, as Paul eagerly showed his tablet to Matthew. On the screen were videos of a young child's hands drawing, accompanied by a pleasant yet clumsy voiceover and the sight of heartfelt drawings. Paul had turned to drawing when his illness limited his physical activities. Encouraged by my passion for art from my childhood, we discovered not only Paul's talent, but also his unique style and happiness while drawing. Seeking to share this joy, I started posting his drawing videos online, keeping his identity anonymous. To our surprise, a well-known figure shared one of Paul's videos, catapulting his work to widespread attention and even generating ad revenue. My video editing skills, initially just a hobby, became proficient enough to take on freelance projects. Paul's videos are a hobby, and will only continue as long as he enjoys it. However, I'm planning to further my skills and take on more editing work. "We're doing fine without your concern," I assured Matthew, emphasizing our independence. Matthew's reaction, wondering why he wasn't informed of Paul's success earlier, revealed his motives. "If I had known Paul was bringing in that much, I would have," his words trailed off, highlighting his opportunistic attitude. This conversation only reinforced my decision to move forward without relying on Matthew, focusing instead on our newfound path to independence and happiness. I had my reasons for not telling Matthew about Paul's success. I was afraid he'd see it as an opportunity and push Paul too hard, something I couldn't allow. Matthew's reaction, when confronted with the truth, was a mixture of shock and anger. He tried to appeal to Paul, asserting that they should be together as the real family due to their blood relation. But Paul, wise beyond his years, rejected this notion. He expressed how I had always been there for him, through every emotion and every milestone, unlike Matthew, who had been absent when needed the most. Paul's refusal was firm, emphasizing that our bond, not defined by blood, but by love and support, was his true family. Even when Matthew tried to leverage their biological connection, Paul stood his ground, highlighting Matthew's absence in his life. Matthew's attempts to reclaim his place as a father were met with Paul's honest and cutting observations, leaving Matthew with no ground to stand on. When Matthew learned about Paul's earnings, he saw it as an angle to refuse the divorce, claiming his rights as Paul's father. But it was my in-laws, surprisingly, who intervened. They had witnessed everything: Matthew's neglect, his infidelity, and his sudden interest when money was involved. They supported us, confirming that raising a child was a shared responsibility, one that Matthew had abandoned long ago. The in-laws, whom I had underestimated, played a crucial role in persuading Matthew to agree to the divorce. They had always cared for Paul, contrary to my initial belief. Their support during this time was invaluable, and Paul expressed a desire to maintain a relationship with them post-divorce. With their help, we were able to secure child support from Matthew, despite his initial reluctance and hidden assets. Following the divorce, Matthew's life took a downturn. His actions caught up with him, leading to his resignation and struggle to make ends meet through part-time work. Meanwhile, Paul and I have been thriving. Paul's passion for drawing continues to bring him joy, and his rehabilitation shows promising progress. Inspired by the therapist who worked with Paul, I decided to pursue a career in physical therapy, aiming to support children like him. Our story has touched many, with people often commenting on how much Paul and I resemble each other, a testament to our deep bond. As Paul's mother, I am committed to supporting him through every step of his journey, cherishing our moments together while preparing for the future. Our relationship, built on love, support, and mutual respect, stands as a powerful reminder that family is not just about blood relations, but the connections we choose to nurture and maintain.